Hello everyone, and welcome back. Today I will be continuing to read Black Panther, the Young Prince. So let's continue. Chapter 6. T'Challa looked out from the plane's window. The landscape was as vibrant as a painting. From this high up, he could still make out the glimmering spires and ornamental architecture of the Golden City. The plane was piloted by J'aka, one of Father's top advisors. It was a state-of-the-art machine equipped with so much technology it made the young prince's head spin. In-frame sensors, X-ray lasers, spotlights, gyroscopes, gun turrets, and high-tensile wire nets that could be released from a hatch to ensnare and capture enemies. The quiet motion of the plane put him at ease. 2 flight attendants were there to cater to his every whim. All he had to do was push a button. On the tray next to him was a bottle of water from a Wakandan spring, and a phone/search device that would have been the envy of Silicon Valley if they'd known it existed. He leaned back and basked in the moment, realizing it might be a while before he could enjoy life's little luxuries again. Wake up. T'Challa groggily opened his eyes, but then closed them again. T'Challa, we're almost there. Wake up. He sat up, completely unaware of where he was. M'Baku leaned over him, just inches from his face. T'Challa's breath came short. Something was wrong. I can't breathe! Achoo! Got you, M'Baku roared, as a peanut flew from T'Challa's nostril. Very funny, T'Challa said. I'm so glad you came along. He tossed the peanut into the wastebasket next to him. What would you do without me? M'Baku asked. Breathe a little easier, T'Challa thought. M'Baku nudged T'Challa aside and looked through the window. Look at all those cars, he said. I think I'll buy one when we get there. With what money? T'Challa teased, pushing him away. How much did your father give you? Probably not enough, M'Baku said. But I can always get more from you, right? T'Challa shook his head. M'Baku's father was strict and wasn't a one to afford his son's luxuries. T'Challa yawned and pressed his nose against the window. The blue ribbon of Chicago's lakefront came into view, bordered by a massive highway. Cars as small as ants sped along it. I think I'm going to do quite well here, M'Baku said, crossing his arms behind his head and leaning back against the leather headrest. We're from Wakanda. What does America have that we don't? His friend had a point. Wakanda led the world in science, physics, robotics, weapons research, and much more. But they were going to be strangers in a strange land. There would definitely be a steep learning curve. T'Challa closed his eyes again. Soon they touched down at a private airfield. T'Challa assumed it was private, as there was no one else around except for an older man who greeted J'aka as an old friend. From there, they were driven to the embassy. T'Challa's father had set them up at the African Embassy of Nations on Michigan Avenue, right in the heart of the city. They were to take their dinners in their rooms, and the staff was not to speak of their visit. Every day, they would have to take a bus to school to keep up appearances. After all, they couldn't be dropped off in a limousine with tinted windows and an armed driver. J'aka maneuvered the sleek black car along the highway as if he had done it 1,000 times. T'Challa looked out of the window. At first all he saw were fields and farms, but slowly the traffic became more congested. Buildings rose up like wild things. Steel and concrete towers wreathed in fog. It was different from Wakanda. T'Challa realized. There wasn't enough green. The words concrete jungle came to mind. People were everywhere, walking on the streets, bundled in big coats, heads tucked against the wind. T'Challa shivered. Just moments before, when they'd launched at the airfield, they were led through a tunnel to their car without even venturing into the open air, but he still felt the drop in temperature. He had to admit he wasn't looking forward to Chicago's legendary cold. Finally, they arrived on a street where shops with lighted windows and artistic fashion displays lined both sides. The Magnificent Mile, J'aka pointed out. M'Baku peered out the window. I've heard of this, he said. This is where all the rich people shop. T'Challa shook his head. The car passed a very plain-looking brick building nestled between two larger ones. Here we are, J'aka announced. He parked in an underground garage and then led both boys to the lobby and front desk. He disappeared into the back with a man wearing a Bluetooth earpiece. T'Challa took a moment to look around. The ceiling was high, with several gleaming chandeliers, but the carpet was brown and a little soiled. The wooden furniture was old and unpolished. Some embassy, M'Baku groaned. A moment later, J'aka returned. A man wearing a cap and a black suit followed him and piled their luggage onto a cart. He looked at T'Challa and M'Baku with curiosity. The concierge will show you to your room, and then I will be on my way back, J'aka said. Your father said to tell you one more time to be on your best behavior. He looked at both boys. Understood? They both nodded. J'aka shook their hands, gave a small nod to T'Challa, then departed. The embassy room was small, with 2 beds, a tiny refrigerator, a smaller bathroom, and drab brown curtains. We have to share a room? M'Baku complained. I don't think we're in Wakanda anymore, T'Challa replied. M'Baku shook his head. You're a prince, and you're gonna live like this? Shh! T'Challa whispered, and then knocked on a thin wall. People could hear us. I have to remain secret, remember? Yeah, said M'Baku, throwing his bag on the floor. I hear you. T'Challa found his safe in the closet and immediately came up with a combination, then tucked the box with his suit and ring inside. He looked around the room. One small window let in weak gray light. Oh, he heard M'Baku call with curiosity. This is interesting. T'Challa walked over to see what it was. M'Baku knelt on one knee next to an open cabinet under a small refrigerator. T'Challa lowered his head and looked inside. He smiled. It was a treasure trove of American snacks arranged in neat little rows. Potato chips, chocolate, crackers, popcorn, nuts, chewing gum, more chocolate, and several things he didn't even recognize. M'Baku raised an eyebrow. Hungry? 20 minutes later, both boys were spread out on their separate beds, holding their stomachs. M'Baku had even eaten all the breath mints. I think I'm going to be sick, he groaned. T'Challa had eaten his fair share too. Wakanda was not known for junk food, and both boys were hungry from their flight. His father would certainly not have approved. He lay back and put a hand over his stomach. I think it was the extra candy bar that pushed me over the edge, he said, and then he belched. A loud rattle sounded in his ears. He turned his head. M'Baku was already asleep, snoring like a rhino.